You're listening to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. Just a quick heads up before we get started with this episode, I wanted to let you know about a free resource for listeners of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. That means you. If you are planning your next trip abroad, or if you're just getting back out into the world again, maybe you're going to an event or to a festival or to a meetup, that you need to be prepared for what to say when you meet someone for the first time. Download our free Spanish conversation guide so that you'll be prepared to have a conversation with anyone that you meet for the first time in Spanish. We give you a list of the most common questions that you'll be asked and that you may want to ask someone when you meet them for the first time, along with the responses so that you can be prepared when you have that conversation in less than 30 minutes. So to get your free conversation guide, just go to SpanishConversationGuide.com. Simple, right? SpanishConversationGuide.com to download your quick guide to prep for your first Spanish conversation. Did you know that there's a city in Colombia that is the only place in Latin America where a Spanish-based Creole is spoken? I found out about this historic city on my trip to Cartagena, Colombia, back in 2019 when I was launching this very podcast. Listen to this episode to hear more about this historic city and actually hear the language that's spoken there. Entonces, vamos a empezar. Let's get started.
Bienvenidos. Welcome to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast,
the show for Spanish learners
that love music,
travel, and culture.
Close your grammar textbooks,
shut down the language apps, and open your ears
to how Spanish is spoken in the real world.
Let us show you
how to go from beginner
to bilingual.
Here's your host,
certified language coach,
Tamara Marie.
Hola y bienvenidos al episodio 230. Welcome to episode 230 of the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast. This is part 2 of my Historia de viaje, where I talked about how I visited Colombia by accident when I was supposed to be in Panama. So if you missed part 1 of the story, definitely go back and check out episode 229. But in this episode, when we left off in part 1, I was actually on a tour in Cartagena. Y la conversación cambió a la historia. And we started talking more about the history of the region as we were walking through a very, very busy market in Cartagena. Our tour guide started telling us about this place just outside the city called Palenque, el primer pueblo libre de las Americas. She explained how enslaved Africans managed to escape to freedom and how it all started with the women.
Los africanos que vivían en esclavitud aquí en Cartagena empezaron a huir y empezaron a formar nuevos pueblos. Esos nuevos pueblos se les llamó Palenque. Existieron varios palenques. Uno de ellos fue La Matuna, otro de ellos fue San Basilio. San Basilio es el único pueblo de América que aún existe, que fue un pueblo de esclavos, es el único. En el año de 1603, los esclavos que huyeron formaron este pueblo. ¿Qué pasó? Que en el camino, esta era una tierra de indios, había muchos indios, todo esto era indio. En el camino, ellos pudo haber sido porque ellos se llevaban los indios también para que les ayudaran a crear el pueblo. Entonces pudo haber sido que en ese viaje y en ese camino que ellos tomaron para crear el pueblo se llevaron indios que después fueron a vivir a Palenque. Pero principalmente la tierra, los Palenques, San Basilio de Palenque, es una tierra que fue de esclavos. Los esclavos que huían se les llamó cimarrón. Bueno, otra de las estrategias que ellos utilizaban eran las trenzas, the braids. En las trenzas ellos mostraban, eran mapas
¿Qué es mapa?
Maps.
A map?
Yes. Yes.
The
Trenzas son
braids,
así,
yeah,
ajá.
the braids were a map.
Yes. Yes.
Para
Map.
escapar
Para escapar.
esclavitud.
Yes.
¡Wow! ¡Qué bueno!
Yes.
Eso es muy interesante.
Yes.
Entonces, una estrategia para los esclavos para escapar
Así es.
a Palenque. ¿O?
Así es. Así es.
¡Wow!
Así es. Entonces, las mujeres, ellas hacían así y le mostraban a los hombres. Y tenían un significado.
Ajá.
Por un ejemplo,
Ajá.
habían peinados que eran así, eran como así. Y estos simbolizaban montañas.
Sí.
Mountains.
Yeah.
Mountains.
Yeah.
Ajá.
Mountains.
Yeah.
Yes. Y las trenzas de braids también sirvieron para esconder semillas, seeds,
Ajá.
y gold, oro. Las mujeres, ellas trabajaban como housekeeping. Entonces ellas se robaban, steal, las semillas de seeds and the gold and hide them
En la trenza.
en la trenza y huían.
¡Wow!
Y huían, y de esta forma ellas podían cultivar para comer.
¡Wow! Es muy interesante.
Sí. Palenque tiene mucho de la cultura africana, y en el 2005 fue considerado a Heritage Site por la UNESCO, 2005. ¿Por qué? Porque en Palenque aún, currently, tú puedes encontrar tradiciones y costumbres de África que ya tú en África no las ves.
I was fascinated to hear that women actually used their hairstyles as maps to help other slaves flee to freedom. It just shows the creativity and ingenuity of people, and I was also still very shocked that I had never heard about the city before. I mean, I consider myself pretty intelligent, well-read. I know a lot about African history, Black history in the Americas, and I was learning about Latin America, but this still was a shock to me. There was a town founded by escaped slaves back in the 1600s when slavery was still alive and well in the United States for another few hundred years. They established their own city outside of the walls of Cartagena, which is a very popular tourist attraction now. But they established this city and they found ways to survive, and hiding the seeds in their hair so that they could take it back. All of this was fascinating to me. So we're standing there in the middle of this market, and I'm listening to her tell this story, and I hear this music playing in the background. I'm sure you heard it. And I actually found out that it was called champeta. Champeta is a type of Afro-Colombian music that has roots in both Africa and the Caribbean. Es un sonido único. It usually has a strong bass line, they use synthesizers, and you can really hear the influence from Congolese rumba. And of course, like all great music, there's a dance that goes along with it. It's a partner dance, it's really energetic, and there's a lot of footwork involved in it as well, which really reminds me of traditional bachata. So I really enjoyed hearing this new genre of music and learning about the dance, and to find out that it is really popular all along the coast of Colombia. So if you want to see and hear a little bit more champeta, then check out our show notes page at learnspanishconsalsa.com/230. We'll include some videos there so you can see the dance in action and also hear a little bit more of the music. Y aquí es donde la historia se pone aún mejor. That afternoon, I received a message from the woman that I had met the first day in Cartagena that was wearing the really colorful dress with traditional Colombian garb. And she had reached out to me through WhatsApp. Y me dijo que era de Palenque y me invitó a visitar su pueblo. No lo podía creer. The next morning, I was in her car on the way to the very place that I had just learned about the day before. Now, the drive was about an hour away from Cartagena, and with every minute that passed, my anxiety just started to go up. Because if you know me, I tend to plan things at the last minute, and I actually had a flight to catch later that day. And I was really afraid that I might miss the flight. We were supposed to catch a bus, but the bus didn't come, so we ended up getting a ride from one of her friends. And I was just thinking the whole time, like, how can I pass up this opportunity to visit this town? Era una oportunidad única. Cuando llegamos, it was like we were transported into West Africa. De verdad, fue como entrar en otro mundo. Las casas eran sencillas y había calles de tierra. I ended up joining a tour that was already in progress, and the local guide started explaining how the location for the town was strategically chosen. That's when I learned that the how of their escape was only part of the story. The where was just as important.
Para nuestra ubicación en la zona, y el green es el verde, todo lo que es la naturaleza exuberante y que fue determinante porque la ubicación de nosotros fue también en esta zona alejada de Cartagena porque los negros conocían bien la naturaleza y fue un obstáculo para los perseguidores. Es decir, toda esta naturaleza que hoy convivimos es parte fundamental de nuestro asentamiento porque también no fue escogido el terreno al azar, fue escogido milimétricamente porque nos brindaba ventajas, porque los negros conocían la selva desde África y fue un obstáculo para los perseguidores y hoy fortaleza para nosotros.
So the Africans that were enslaved in Colombia at that time used their knowledge of the jungle and similar terrain back home to help them escape and find a place where it'd be really difficult for Spaniards and others to find them, which I think is genius. And again, so fascinating that they were able to do this and preserve a culture that is much different from the other parts of the country. As we continued on the tour, we are walking through the streets. There are a lot of dirt roads. We were looking at the houses. There were murals everywhere. And the tour guide started to explain a little bit about the town and the culture of modern Palenque.
Como les comentaba, Palenque es un pueblo que es el primer pueblo libre de América, libre de esclavitud. Aquí fue donde se dijo libertad, no más esclavitud. Y hoy Palenque es un rincón de África en América. Palenque tiene 4.000 personas. Es un pueblo tranquilo, amable, vivía de la agricultura, de la ganadería, de los dulces típicos y del enoturismo. Palenque también es patrimonio por la UNESCO. En el año 2005 fuimos elegidos. Aquí también se da algo muy importante, que el palenquero es solidario entre nosotros, porque todos los palenqueros estamos en un cuadro. Cuadro es un grupo de personas de la misma edad. Ella es palenquera, está en un cuadro, y el cuadro es solidaridad, desde la primera infancia hasta que la muerte nos separe. Y todos nos conocemos, todos somos y estamos en las buenas y en las malas. Ellas me dicen que es tiempo de mojar, es cierto. San Sebastián, porque en cualquier momento te echan agua. Aquí tenemos un reflejo de Palenque, porque Palenque es sinónimo de libertad, asentamiento, y además es fortalecido con palos, palizadas, en aquel entonces para evitar que las fieras invadieran a sus viviendas, y hoy es un reflejo propio. Se le llamó Cumbes en Venezuela, Quilombos en Brasil y aquí Palenque, pero es lo mismo.
So here we are in this town with its own culture, its own traditions, and named for the very palos, or wood planks that protected it from outsiders. These strong wooden planks actually fenced in the town and provided protection for the people who settled there. Now, the tour guide in Cartagena did talk a little bit about how African culture influenced the language spoken in Palenque. Here's how she explained it.
En África, África es un gran continente. En los años que empezó la esclavitud, llegaron esclavos que hablaban portugués, colonias portuguesas, francesas, French, colonias francesas, obviamente colonias inglesas, trajeron esclavos de diferentes partes. ¿Qué hicieron la gente de Palenque? Hicieron una mezcla de francés, portugués, español, inglés y africano, bantú. Y crearon su propio idioma. ¿Para qué? Porque si tú hablas español con ella, yo hablo mi idioma y tú no entiendes.
Sí.
Y ellos podían huir. Entonces, ellos crearon su propio idioma, que es lo que hoy se llama palenquero. Palenquero es el idioma de ellos. Pero ellos también hablan español. Ellos hablan español y palenquero.
Ella tiene toda la razón. Sí, Palenque tiene su propio idioma, palenquero. Now, you're probably familiar with Haitian Creole that is more French-based, but this is a Spanish-based Creole language. And it's really interesting that when you're listening to it, you can actually hear the influence of Spanish, so you might be able to understand a little bit of it, but there's also clearly influences from other languages from Africa, like the tour guide in Cartagena mentioned. Bantu was a heavy influence on the language spoken in Palenque. At this point in the tour, we actually got to hear some palenquero. So the tour guide starts by explaining some phrases, and he actually translated them from palenquero to Spanish. So I'm going to give you a heads up in English so you know what he's saying. So he starts out by explaining in palenquero, we all have a piece of Africa in our heart. We all have a piece of Africa in our heart. And then he says, you are our sister. She is our sister. He is our brother. So he's basically saying like we're all family. And then he says, so make yourself at home. May you enjoy our town, our own land. Listen to how that sounds in palenquero.
Asina que to suto atengan di corazón un chito de África. Todos tenemos nuestro corazón un pedazo de África. Voy taya sendan humana suto. Voy taya sendan humana suto. Él es humano. Tú eres hermana nuestra, ella hermana nuestra y él hermano nuestro. Asina que sindino andi posaenu, jarocheno andi tiela suto memo. Que se sientan en su casa, que se gocen en nuestro pueblo, nuestra propia tierra.
Hearing those words and standing in the middle of this town, it was really hard not to feel like I was at home. I saw people that looked like they could be my cousins or distant relatives walking around, just living life in this town and trying to preserve and protect their culture. Like so many other unique communities of indigenous people are really trying to balance interaction with the outside world and where they're from. I actually found a book called Ma Ngove, and it was written by a researcher who spent time in Palenque learning the language and learning the culture and talking to the people. And that Ma Ngombe, which I'm probably not pronouncing perfectly, it actually means like my friend, like mi pana, mi amigo. The book is written in Spanish, but it's a really interesting deep dive into the culture of Palenque in las ochentas. And even in that book, they're talking about how, you know, people are learning Spanish, they're not speaking their own language as much, and you can really tell that there is a pride, like the woman I met in the market. She was very proud of the city that she was from, but there's definitely a fight to preserve the language, to preserve the culture, to preserve the heritage of this historic town. This is just one of those moments that sticks with you. I have never forgotten it, and es algo que no puedo olvidar, and I was so glad that I took the chance to visit. Now, in case you're wondering, I did make my flight that day, but just barely. Everything else had gone so wrong in this trip, I was due for some good karma. But when I left, I felt more connected to Latin America than ever before. It was so shocking to me. ¿Cómo era posible que yo no tenía ni idea que existe un pueblo libre de africanos en las Americas, and it was right there in Colombia. This is a history that I was never taught in school, and I'm sure you were never taught in a Spanish classroom. Cada vez que viajo, aprendo algo nuevo, something that connects me more and more to the people who once felt like strangers speaking a strange language. Gente que hablaba un idioma externo. Pero ahora yo veo que todos estamos en el mismo mundo y todos estamos conectados. And I believe this now more than ever. So for this trip that started as un desastre, a complete nightmare, it ended up being one of the most important lessons of my life. Y por eso siempre estaré agradecida de la gente de Palenque. As always, I hope something you heard in this podcast has taken you one step closer from Spanish beginner to bilingual. Hasta la próxima.
Thank you for listening to the Learn Spanish con Salsa podcast at learnspanishconsalsa.com.